Hello guys, and welcome to this Volks Wizard video. Now today's video is about a very controversial car, the Audi S6 TDI Avant. Controversial for two reasons that we'll come to later. I better explain where I am right now. I'm in the Eiffel Mountains, a couple of miles away from the Nürburgring. We've used this car to go to the Frankfurt Motor Show, and we're now on our way back. We've done about 800 miles in it, very varied miles. We've been stuck in traffic, we've been flat out on the Autobahn, we've been on these amazing roads that thread their way around the Eiffel Mountains. Yep, so I've had a very good, broad picture of the capability of this car, which I want to relate to you in this video. So without any further ado, let's have a look at the S6 Avant's TDI. Okay, at first impressions, this car looks a lot like an S-Line, but that's not a bad thing because S models pack a lot of performance in a relatively stealthy body shell, which means you can drive around discreetly without drawing too much attention, which is an advantage for many. One of the controversial features about this S car though is that the performance comes from a diesel engine. But put that to one side, the only difference is when you go to a filling station, don't go for the green pump, go for the black one. Fill the tank up and drive a lot further on the tank of fuel that you've just bought. This car does combined is about 36 miles per gallon, and it gives it a range, well, I think you can drive from London to Frankfurt, so around 550 to 600 miles, which is pretty impressive. But you're not interested in economy. This car does 0 to 60 quicker than a manual Golf R. So this 2-ton wagon is quicker than a manual Golf R. Let's just have a few seconds to think about that. Now, key to its performance is the torque figure, 700 Newton meters of torque. I think that's close to a lorry. I think it's more than the old RS6 anyway. It's got 349 horsepower, which isn't a massive figure, but the torque figure affects the way this car drives more in the real world. So yeah, rest assured, it's well worthy of the S badge. Externally, I love the new A6 styling. It's a Mark Lichter creation. He's given it haunches. When I interviewed the designer of this car in last year at the Avant launch, I said to him, oh, you've done such a great job with this car, the RS6 is going to look mega. And he gave me a cheeky smile, and now I've seen the RS6, I can totally understand why. Now, the other controversial feature of this car is the fake exhausts. Now, the problem Audi have had is that the S models are so discreet, they only really have a couple of little tweaks over the standard model badges, the silver mirrors and the exhausts. So it was important that it had these exhausts to distinguish it over an S-Line, but the engineering of it meant that it would have been quite difficult to make them genuine. So what we have are these full cup, like cups you could drink out of them, and we've got an exhaust pointing down just there. So nothing over here. On the S4 at least they've made those connect with the tailpipes, but these are all utterly fake. Now I know that's not ideal, and in the ideal world they should have just engineered the car properly and made the exhaust live, but it is what it is. So let's put that to one side and forget about it for now, because it's just a small feature of a very otherwise impressive car. Let's have a look inside. Okay. Well, typical Audi, especially in this sort of segment, it's very impressive indeed. We've got the pan roof, which is about £2,000, makes the cabin much more airy. The front bit opens to about here. The back is also glass with a blind, and that's fixed. Another controversial feature actually is that we've got the touchscreen displays, but having lived with the car for a few days now, I've not actually had too much of an issue with these. Some people are quite happy that the climate control has been left as knobs on some of the lower models, but in all honesty, you don't actually touch the climate control all that often, so the fact it's touchscreen makes no difference. And anyway, this screen, when you get to learn its ways, it's actually quite good. You have to listen for the haptic feedback, you have to press it hard like it's a button. There's no point trying to touch it gently because it won't work. Give it a firm press and it works every time. So yeah, that's actually pretty nice. And when you turn it off, it's very minimalist. Minor issue is that we've got Apple CarPlay via the cable when we've got wireless charging for the phone, so that's a bit annoying. On some BMWs apparently you can have wireless Apple CarPlay, but they make it subscription. On the new Passat apparently wireless Apple CarPlay and charging is coming, but whether that's a subscription, I don't know, probably not with Volkswagen, I'd imagine. Another thing is when we've been using Waze, it's been resetting itself quite a few times. It's somehow not very happy with this interface. The other problem is, I'll just straighten the steering wheel. You can't have any Apple CarPlay on that virtual cockpit, which is a shame considering the technological progress of that cluster. I'll just show you what we've done so far. So we've had 15 hours of driving, done 816 miles and 33.8 miles to the gallon, an average speed of 55. So yeah, we've used this car pretty well, and I think seats should always not draw any attention to them if they're good seats, and we haven't really had anything to say about these seats. That must mean they're utterly brilliant. Interestingly, adaptive cruise is down here, and actually this is nicer to use than when the buttons are on the steering wheel on some VWs, because you know exactly where it is without looking. We've got memory seats, but we haven't played around with. We've only got one key anyway. We've got the drive select button down here, which we have actually used quite a lot, and it's a bit annoying because it's really hard. There's there's nothing different from any buttons on here when you're feeling it. So you really have to kind of guess what you're doing, and it does take a lot of effort to do that. It could do with something a little bit more functional than that. The shifter, we actually don't like either. You put it into park and you press that button, but it's a bit, you're never really sure you've pressed it and stuff like that. I'm sure you'll get used to it and it'll be okay. The other thing it does is if you leave it in Tiptronic mode, it will move itself automatically over with a, which is a bit peculiar the first time. Let's have a look in the back then. So we're most definitely in my driving position after all that driving. The doors are a bit odd as well. There's this sort of slight snagginess to them. I thought it had the soft closing function, but it doesn't, so a bit peculiar. Okay, so I'm 6 foot, I'm in my driving position. Yeah, plenty of room as you expect for a car of this size. Likewise in the boot, got electric tailgate. I think that's standard because it's not on the option list. Plenty of room. I think Joey Kelly said something was missing from these luggage hoops, and they gave us this luggage net this time, but it seems a bit small for the car. That's on its maximum stretch, so you really can't get much under there really. You need something about at least half as big again to work properly. But yeah, it's a big boot, standard A6 boot. Now this car uses selective catalyst regeneration, which means you have to put AdBlue in it. It's got a 63 litre tank upgradable to 73, and the AdBlue tank is also upgradable from 12 to 22. So yeah, this car's got the standard thing, and the range is about 550 to 600 miles, so London to Frankfurt, no problem. So I think it's now probably a good time to go and drive this car on the wonderful roads here in the Eifel Mountains. Okay guys, here we are behind the wheel of the S6 TDI Avant, and first impressions are that this is a very comfortable car. We're in automatic mode. We've got the air suspension, which does give the car a sense of compliance that's removed from the steel sprung cars that I've driven so far. Whether it will hold up on the twisting country roads we'll find out later, but the ride quality in this auto mode is brilliant. We've driven it in dynamic as well elsewhere, and it's not a harsh car as well. It just feels like a big comfy armchair, which is not a bad thing when you're covering lots of miles and spending all day in it like we have. This car's got acoustic glazing, which unfortunately isn't available in the UK, which no doubt adds to some of the refinement. And also the adaptive air suspension unfortunately isn't available in the UK, but also in probably a good way, you can't get the 21-inch wheels, which are at least as big as those on the RS6, which is a bit ridiculous on a diesel car, but they do look good, and it's a big car. But I think 20s with some adaptive suspension in the UK would be a pretty good balance, both of aesthetics and ride quality. Now this car does 36.2 on the WLTP tested cycle, so that's very realistic, and before we hit the Autobahn and we were doing 100 plus on a regular basis, we were seeing that all the time. So yeah, that's a very realistic MPG. I'm pretty sure that's a combined figure, so if you're doing slower driving or more consistent driving, you'll probably get up to about 40, maybe even above, and that's not bad for a 2-ton car that does 0 to 60 in 5 seconds dead. And that's the big difference with this car over the RS6 and the old 4-litre turbo, petrol turbo S6. It's a very, very usable package, and people buy these cars to use them. Much like the S4 Avant TDI I drove a few weeks ago in the UK, this car will appeal to a lot more people. It may not appeal to previous S6 owners, but how many of those were they? If Audi have annoyed them, well, that's just collateral damage for appealing to a much bigger audience that previously haven't justified the purchase of an S model. And there are other cars as well. You could buy the 50 TDI model, which has got most of the performance. I think it's got 620 Newton meters of torque, but you can't get away from the kudos of having an S badge, and this car is well worthy of it, I think. Now, we've not got any time for autobahn driving this morning, and we've been travelling pretty much during the day, which even in Germany, even at a weekend, is not the safest place to try and do top speed runs, especially in a car like this. It doesn't actually get to its top speed very quickly. It gets to 120 really good, but after that it does take a bit of time, and whilst the brakes have been brilliant, if a little jerky at slow speeds, it's not something worth risking. It's not really that kind of car. Joe Achilles 211 in that R8 was an incredible feat, but in this car it's a bit pointless really. I've got some footage here. We got it up to 140 without problem, so it'll no doubt hit the limiter relatively easily, but on a busy Saturday afternoon it just was a bit too dangerous. This car's got the 8-speed ZF automatic Tiptronic transmission, so it's not a twin clutch car, it's a torque converter in the old style, but it's a very clever version of that, so it doesn't affect efficiency too much. The problem with it is that it likes to select 8th gear on the motorway quite regularly, and any little tap of the throttle it goes down to 7th, not particularly smoothly. Bear in mind, if you're in 8th and you're on the motorway, you're probably going quite fast anyway. Sometimes it picks 6th as well, so Stephen actually has been complaining about it being a bit unsettling for him, which is a bit of a shame. I think whatever mode, but particularly in dynamic, it's not so good at that. And also it's not as instant, not as seamless as you accelerate through the gears as a twin clutch car. The benefits of it though are that slow speed manoeuvring is much smoother. A twin clutch car is basically an automated manual, and it can be a little bit difficult for some of them to manage slow speed manoeuvring as smoothly as this car. So if you're stuck in traffic, this car is a lot nicer to use for that reason, but it's lost a bit of the dynamic edge of a twin clutcher. Another benefit of this car when you're manoeuvring is that we have 4-wheel steering, so up to a certain speed the wheels turn in one direction, and that makes it a little bit, cuts the turning circle basically, and then above a certain speed, I think it might be 60 kilometers an hour, the wheels follow the front wheels, and that gives the car more stability at high speed. And it doesn't feel like a big car in any situation really. It's quite wide, but then it's not excessive. So it's pretty easy to use, especially with the comprehensive parking sensors and gadgets fitted to this car. There is a fair bit of driver assistance technology on this car, like lane assist and adaptive cruise and front assist and all that. I think it's called Audi Presense, which means that it can sense if you're going to drive into something which can be a little bit too keen. I basically feel like I'm a test driver for autonomous vehicles with this kind of car. Yeah, you can switch it off, and actually on this car there's a lovely little button here that lets you vary the amount of driver assistance, so you can have maximum, individual and basic, but we keep it in maximum because without that you don't get the blind spot warning in the mirrors, which both Stephen and I agree is a very, very useful feature that should be on a lot more cars. A lot of people give it away as standard, so it's a shame Audi don't, but when you're driving like we are all day in the car, you know, possibly your concentration could be wanting slightly, and they just look after you nicely. It means that you're very less likely to pull out on another car, especially if you're driving a right-hand drive car on a left-hand drive road. So yeah, that's really cool. I think that's called Audi Side Assist, so yeah, I like that a lot. As for lane assist, well, it is a little bit annoying, to be honest. It's always tugging at the wheel, even going on motorways at, you know, at high speeds. There's always a sense that it's just tweaking away at the steering just to tell you to make sure you're steering, which can get on your nerves, to be perfectly honest. Now, another good thing about this car is that it's very hard to tell when you're driving that it's a diesel. There is a contrived V8 rumble to it. It's definitely a V8 rumble, just like the S4 TDI, and I think it's pretty impressive. Driving around here with lots of petrol heads, they do look at the car and they're not looking at it because it's got a diesel rattle, they're looking at it because it sounds like a muscle car, to be perfectly honest. I'll just crack the sunroof open and see if we can replicate some of that. So yeah, it's a great sound and it's really authentic inside and out. We've got the optional electrically adjustable steering column in this car, and with the electrically adjustable seats with massive lumbar adjustment, there's really no excuse for not being comfortable. As I said earlier, we've lived in this car for hours and it's been just a great place to be. One little issue is that the pedals seem to be offset to the right, so looking down the centre of the steering wheel, I'm only getting half the brake pedal in the centre, the rest of it's over to the right. There have been a couple of times where my actually quite small 8.5 size feet have been catching the brake when I've been going for the throttle, so yeah, that's a bit peculiar, but it could just be me. Okay guys, well, enough sensible consumer advice. This is still an S car and you probably want to know how it drives, and on these roads around here it's a great test of a car. I don't recommend you drive crazily on the roads around the ring. You should go and do that on the ring, but this is a relatively slow road, so let's go and see what this car can do. Let's launch it first, see what it sounds like as well. So full foot to the boards. That's a very AMG-esque V8-ness to it, no dieselness at all. I suppose the good thing about driving a right-hand drive car on these roads is that you're very close to the edge of the road, so you can position the car quite confidently. So we're in full-on dynamic road, which makes everything stand to attention. There's a little bit of a lurch in the gear changes, but it's all right. What's surprising is how composed it feels. This car does feel squidgy in any mode, but once you get it loaded up in corners, it does feel really quite neutral. Brakes are reassuring. This is 2 tons and I'm driving it like a hot hatch, so they're obviously having a bit of a workout, but we'll see how they are at the end of this session. Load it up, and yeah, once it's on its bump stops it feels really good. The steering's not got an awful lot of feel to it, as you'd probably expect. So a little technical section now, just cut the corner here a bit, onto the brakes, drop a gear. And then it gave me that gear, even though it's a diesel with a relatively low rev range, it's not afraid to give you gears. And then out that corner, a little bit of a shove from the back, because we've got the 1550 Sport Diff, which is money well spent. So in dynamic mode it's pushing a lot more of the drive to the back, like that. So normally you'd understeer there with the weight on the back of the car. None of that at all. Let's hope the brakes are still good. Yeah. So you lean it in and there's stuff going on there to just make the back a bit more mobile. It sort of defies the laws of physics. I'm not sure if I'm defying the laws of Germany now. And the brakes are still doing their job. So yeah, I can't believe I've just done that in a 2-ton diesel estate car. I don't think I need to say any more. Okay, well, I'm here at the famous YouTube corner, which is probably the best place to come to the conclusion as to whether this is actually the thinking man's RS6. On the basis of what I've seen today, it's an incredible package. It's fast, it's good looking, it's economical, it's practical, it sounds good, it even looks good in a subtle kind of way. Yeah, the RS6 will be faster and it will sound authentically good, but it'll also be a lot thirstier, and it'll always be thirsty, but you won't be able to use much of that performance much of the time, particularly on the public road, and it's not even really a track car. If you live in Germany, it's a different story. You can use the top speed and the performance a lot more, but in the UK, definitely this is a far more sensible choice. Whether you want to be sensible, well, that's not something for me to tell you, and the RS6 will be an incredible car. I look forward to driving it in the future, but for once we have some clear air between the cars, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this Volkswizard video from the Nürburgring. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, please comment, please share, please subscribe, and now I'm going to go and watch them tourist driving.